Welcome, everybody, to the Best of the Best podcast presented by the Brinks Armored Account. I am your host, Maverick Levy. Today, we have somebody that has been on the show before in the old format, as I call it, the old versions, the old seasons of the podcast. He is somebody that is a friend, that is an associate, a strategic partner. That is Matt Spritz from the Spritz Group. Matt, welcome back.
It's good to be here. I'm happy to take part in 2.0.
I'm happy to have you here.
It's always good to be here.
I always say the best place to start, I think, is for new people to kind of give you the floor, give your background, give your story, talk about what you do, talk about who you are, let people get to know you before we talk about the craziness.
Oh, right. So you're giving me the baton. You don't have specific, you're not going to fire specific questions.
No.
All right.
This is an unscripted conversation.
This is unscripted. So I could literally say anything and then you'll just edit it out later.
Exactly.
Oh my God. All right. So, it's great to be here talking to you. We always have a good time. I'll start. I'm Matt Spritz. I am born and raised in South Florida and currently call South Florida home. I'm a graduate of NYU Law School, but I actually like to say that I'm a retired lawyer, sometimes recovering lawyer, because I don't practice law anymore, but I do have a lot of friends that do. I was a corporate litigator for about 10 years, and then about 10 years ago, I'm in my early 40s, I made a decision that I really wanted to be in the world of state and local government affairs, or politics more specifically. It's something that I just always loved.
Why?
Well, I was in student government in college, and I was a debate kid in high school, and and again, this is like going back like 20 something years ago. I was in student government in law school. It was just something that I was always interested in, and I majored in political science and history in college. And so coming out of college, it's sort of like, well, I'm going to go to law school and, be a lawyer and, and all that. And it's funny because now I always like young kids are always like, oh, hey, should I go to law school? What do you think? And I'm like, well, do you want to be a lawyer? Right. And unless they're like, yes, I want to be a lawyer, I'm like, maybe you shouldn't go. Right. And it's funny because at the time I really did want to be a lawyer. And I like I said, I was a corporate litigator for 10 years. I'm still barred in 2 states and a bunch of federal jurisdictions. But I just got to a point where I'm like, this is not what I want to do. And I've always wanted to be in politics in some way. And so I took a job, running a state Senate race. This was like 10 years ago. And again, I went from like being a senior associate at a law firm to being like a campaign manager on the ground, like knocking on people's doors. But it was like the best decision ever. And I didn't have kids at the time. I wasn't married at the time. I could just do it. Mm-hmm. And, so I found my way into it, and from there had a bunch of different roles in the state political process in Florida, on campaigns, inside of the legislature, running legislative affairs for a state agency. I was a candidate for the Florida House here in Palm Beach County 7 years ago. So I've done, I've worn all the hats. And so, 5.5 years ago, I made the decision to open the Spritz Group as the managing partner. And at the time, in the beginning, I had like one client, right, for like when you first open up. But you work hard for your clients, you deliver results, and 5.5 years later, I've grown like 65% a year, every single year, and awesome. I love what I do. I love my clients. I'm still sort of structured as a boutique firm, so I get to show my clients a lot of attention. Now I sort of fluctuate anywhere between 12 and 15 clients that I'm managing things for at all levels of government in Florida. But I love it. There's strategy involved. There's policy making and knowledge involved. It's relationship building. There's, being a lawyer helps, because I can read statute and and not give legal advice per se, because I'm not functioning as a lawyer, but it certainly informs, how I can advise clients from a consulting standpoint. But that's what I do. I'm married. I have 2 beautiful children. We reside in East Boca Raton near the ocean.
Nice.
I love my family. I just everything's great, man. Our dog is kind of crazy, but we love him too. Oreo, that's right.
Oreo's the man.
Oreo is the man.
Oreo's my favorite Spritz.
Oreo is insane. I mean, Oreo, like we walk Oreo. He's like infamous in the neighborhood too.
Is he?
Oh yeah. He's like walking along and he like sees other dogs and he starts going, and like everyone knows they're like, there's Oreo. It's like he's got this like reputation. Yeah, we love him. He's great.
Well, like Oreo has a reputation in your neighborhood, you have a reputation in the state of Florida.
Well, hopefully it's good.
It's like Matt's like barking.
Hopefully it's good, and I'm not like huffing and puffing at like Lady or any of the other dogs down the street.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Right?
What is your favorite part about what you do and how you do it? Because I think obviously with lobbying, everyone has a different specialty and a different way they craft their game plan.
Well, it's advocacy work, right? So it's public policy advocacy work. I mean, that's the first thing I'll say, right? So it's people hear lobbying or lobbyists and they have this like negative image that's like conjured up, and we were talking about this, a little while ago at lunch. But it's just not right. Like I am a public policy advocate. Mm-hmm. So, like I represent companies, organizations, individuals that are looking to interface with government. And in some instances that's, nonprofits that are like delivering services to like kids that are in need, right? In some instances it's companies with new technology that's providing cleaner water or working, with state government programs to provide, better water resources.
Right.
In some instances it's economic development organizations that are, like looking to promote Palm Beach County, for example, right? So it's all, like I'm representing stakeholders that are like, doing the greater good, and it's incredibly rewarding to do that work, right? So like when I was practicing law, I was a litigator, and in that world you are like if anyone's listening to this on audio, they won't get it, but the video, I mean, you're butting heads. It's like you're arguing over commas and periods and stuff. I mean, I'm exaggerating now, but it's destructive. What I do is constructive. Right. I am bringing people together. I'm accomplishing things for good organizations and for good people and for things that I care about. And to be able to do that every day and be challenged is wonderful.
I think the work and the line of work you do, I mean, this from us working in the past together.
Yeah.
It's always fascinating to me because number one, I didn't understand how it works until I dove headfirst into it.
Sure.
And then once you do, you're kind of like, wow. Number one, there's a big misconception.
Yep.
Which you build an assumption based upon growing up in America and learning about politics and hearing the word lobbyist. And
well, you read a lot in the press or wherever, and it's like, all right.
Yeah, and you envision, but then you're actually embedded into these environments. Yeah. And it's pretty amazing how some of these things work. Yep. And I'll say on the other hand, it's pretty discouraging at the same time how some people think. I think there's both sides of the spectrum, but do you ever sit and think about, like, Florida to me is one of these states where it's almost like there's a lot of unification, I would say. But maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm mistaken. You want to move that? You just
I just want to make sure if I'm like adjusting in my chair that I'm not.
So hold like over here.
Oh, I see, and you can just do it that way.
Exactly.
Because I'm leaning this way because I realize I'm leaning this way and looking at you versus this way.
No worries. All technicalities, but
it's all good. Like I said, it'll be edited later,
or not.
Not.
The long form, we don't really edit anything.
I mean, why should you? We're just having a conversation here. Exactly. Who knows what we're gonna say?
But I think there's a lot of unification, and I'll tell you. A voter of Florida, a Floridian for now almost 5 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I see this unification happen.
Welcome to the free state.
Welcome to the sunshine state too.
Well, that's true.
Where I come from.
Well, I know where you left, and there's definitely less sunshine.
There's a lot less.
And it's a lot, and I'd argue it's a lot less free, but
Very much so. You're 100% right about that. And I think you saw that as why there's a huge influx of people coming into states where there is true freedom.
That's right.
But
we can talk about that for an hour.
100%. But I want to get to this point because I see, and I think many others do as well, this unification across the board where everyone in Florida is Republican. The majority of people agree. And see, you're nodding your head like, yeah, maybe that's the case, maybe it's not. Well, but I think I want you to elaborate on that. Is that the truth? Is Florida as unified as it seems? Or is there a lot of detachments within that we as the people don't see?
So I'm smiling because so I'm going to answer that question a couple of different ways. So first of all, you're like, Florida is becoming unified and this, that, and the other. So a little known fact is that even though in like national presidential elections, Florida has been sort of a pendulum until very recently, that is not true at the state level. So at the state level, Florida has been a solid red state going back to the late 1990s. The Republican Party, and I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative, although I do have relationships on both sides of the aisle. In what I do, I get along with everyone. Florida, the Florida Republican Party has been in control of Florida. The Republican Party of Florida has been in control of Florida since like the late 90s. There's been supermajorities in both houses of the legislature going back to the late 90s. The Republican Party has held every elected statewide seat, and I'm not talking like U.S. Senate. I mean like at the state level, right? Has held every statewide elected seat going back to I want to say Jeb Bush's election in 1998, with the exception of two examples. Alex Sink in 2006 was the CFO. She was a Democrat and served for 4 years. And Nikki Fried, who was the Commissioner of Agriculture for 4 years from 2018 to 2022. Mm-hmm. Other than that...
Remind me, is this CFO an elected position?
It is, yes.
It is elected?
It's elected. So other than those two examples... Florida's been red at the state level for 25 years. And I counsel clients on this all the time because they have this perception that, like you just mentioned, it's only like recently. Like, no. The Republican Party controls all the doors and all the levers in Tallahassee. Even Democrats would tell you that. And so that's the power structure that you're navigating and that you're working within. But having said that, a lot of the issues that are, that come up in state and local politics the fault lines aren't necessarily partisan. Or you could have disagreements even within like the Republican Party, right? So one of the headlines that's dominating right now at the state level is this, really what's been a war between the governor and the legislature over certain immigration issues in a special session, and there's just a lot that's been written about it. And I mean, I'm not going to comment, sort of one way or the other, except to say that it is, even within the current sort of state of affairs where Florida is very, very much and obviously a red state, whereas before it wasn't so obvious. You still have fault lines that are being drawn, not necessarily per party and not necessarily, even within the sort of Republican camp, you've got disagreements on things.
What do you think about
and it's my job to advise clients on how to navigate that.
Right. But I think, and again, my comment or my question, let's call it, was relating to the fact of this unification. And I still want a more clear answer. Is there a lot of unification? Let me put it this way. Is there as much unification as we, the voters, believe that there is? Or is, because someone's a Republican doesn't mean they all think the same?
So I understand what you're asking. You're asking, is it like not necessarily amongst elected officials, but amongst the electorate?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I mean, listen, I think that the Republican Party has always been, at least to my view, a big tent party. I don't think that you have, I don't think there's like an ideological purity test where you have to like align on every single thing. I think that, a lot of the issues from a like state and local standpoint are, you don't necessarily have alignment at the national level. I mean, I like the circles that I sort of run in and everything, I mean, everyone is pretty lockstep behind President Trump and what's going on in DC and everything.
Right.
Like, there's a lot of excitement. Florida's like the epicenter of like the Republican political universe. Half of the state's political class is now serving in DC. The governor's chief of staff is a Florida person and a very well-known one. But that's not just her. I mean, it's like all the way through, right? I mean, you've got 2 special elections now, in Congress, in part because of, people that have been moved around to, be nominated to serve in the Trump administration. So, Florida is absolutely, there is this is the center. I would call it the center of the Republican universe.
And so do you think that makes your job, the job that you need to get done for your clients, is it more efficient because there is that unification based upon other people you talk to in other states where maybe there is a bigger divide?
Well, again, I mean, I think at the state level, it's been this way for some time. So this doesn't actually change how I do my job, because this has been the reality here at the state and local level for like a while.
Okay.
But like from a national level, look, what it has done, and again, I'm a state and local specialist, because you have people moving around, it has created openings at the state level. And so you have people that are moving into different positions, which you have to navigate, right? Yeah. So like, for example, the CFO of Florida right now is going to be leaving in a month and a half to go serve in Congress. Well, that creates an opening there where Governor DeSantis is going to have to appoint someone for 2 years, and then there's an open election, right? So that creates. So
if somebody leaves, there's an appointment that happens.
Well, it depends on the position. Like if it's a rep seat, no, it's a special election. It depends on what seat opens up. But a lot of that's happened, right? Like the lieutenant governor resigned last week to go be the president of FIU. So now there's a vacancy in the lieutenant governor's spot, and there's going to be a governor's race in 2 years. So there's a lot of really interesting things going on in Florida right now. Part of it is that this is like the center of the Republican universe, but part of it is also that like there are all of these decks that are being moved around. And so, as someone who's a public policy advocate and who does work at the state level, I advise clients, like, how do you navigate that, right? And I have clients that have issues that have nothing to do with that, right? Mm-hmm. Like I have clients that, one of the issues might be like, they have a particular policy position on like what should be done about the condo assessment issue that's coming up in Florida, right? And it's like, how do you navigate that issue in a world where like literally like the deck plates are changing like in real time, and it's challenging, and it's my job as a strategic advisor to help them steer through that.
What do you think about the 2-party system that we have in America?
Man, you're asking me big stuff. Oh God, that's a really, really good question.
As you think through it, I'll give you my thoughts to give you time.
No, that's fine. I mean, I will say this. I mean, that's a federal question, but it's a state question too.
Right.
It's across the board. I mean, I'll answer it like this. Like I've seen, so like municipal elections are nonpartisan, right? So you have people running that are like just sort of running. I don't know that that's realistic on a bigger scale because of like organization and resources that's required.
Fair.
If you look at other countries that have like multi-party systems, I studied this in college. I mean, you're taking me back now. They tend to be less stable. There tends to be more elections. It's harder to keep a government together. The 2-party system, I think, you have critics because it's like, you feel like every viewpoint's not represented, and, but there's been talk for years, like we need a third party in this country, but it never seems to get off the ground for a lot of different structural reasons.
But I think we saw something amazing happen in this last presidential election with RFK joining Trump.
But even he couldn't run as a third party. It wasn't a viable candidacy.
Right.
So he ultimately realized that he wasn't at home in the Democrat Party, and so he came over and joined Trump.
True.
But it's still within the context of the 2-party system. I mean, a third party, like we've always had a 2-party system, right? Like this isn't like new. Like if you go back to the founding of the Republic, to the election of 1800, right? It was the Democrat, Republicans, and the Federalists, right? And so there was always, the modern Republican Party was born as an abolition party, Abraham Lincoln, right? Mm-hmm. And so there was always two parties in this country, and I would argue it's produced an incredible amount of political stability. Where you look at countries like Italy, where like it's like every year or less there's like another government and there's a shift, and it makes governance
impossible.
Hard. It makes it impossible. Now look,
it really does.
There are downsides to a two-party system too, but I would argue it's more stable than the alternatives.
It's interesting to hear your take, because for somebody at my age, I think I'm trying to find the right word that I want to use.
By the way, this has gone in a direction that I did not expect it to go. So this is cool, man.
I think that for my age group, it's unfortunate is maybe the word I'll use, and I'll say that word, take it lightly, because unfortunate is the word that comes to mind, and we're not going to sit here wait for me to find the right word. And the reason I use the word unfortunate is because I think in today's day and age, technology has enabled people to have access to information in a way that's never been done before, where you don't have to learn anything. You simply have to search something. That has pros and cons. But I think when it comes to politics, you have to choose a side. And because we live in such a polarizing political atmosphere, that I'll say this too, I think the pendulum is shifting. I think we're becoming less polarized, which is a rare take, but I truly believe that. And I believe the reason that that's happening is because technology, things like Doge, things that we've talked about downstairs, have allowed people to pull back the curtain and finally see what actually takes place and what actually happens. But the reason to loop this back into the two-party system is because I'm very much a conservative. You know that. But there's a lot of shit that I don't agree with, that conservatives agree with and want to die in their grave with. But I choose the conservative party because I have to choose a party, right? I'm finding what party, if I'm making a pros and cons list, it's what are the pros, what are the cons of each, and then whatever has more pros to it, obviously, and less cons to it, I'm going with that party. And I think that is the trouble with the two-party system for my age demographic, is people like some of this on the left, people like some of this on the right, and they're trying to find somebody that has that voice in the middle. But going back to your point about facilitating fundraisers, organizing campaigns, the people that are donating big dollars, unfortunately, and I'm sure we'll see this change and we can study the data, they want what they want. And if they want what they want, they're going to get what they want. Meaning they're going to get a person that is preaching, let's call it, exactly what they want.
So I don't agree with that, but I will say this. You're talking about America being so polarized. That's not because of the two-party system, right? I mean, like the two-party system goes back the like entire 250 years of
that's a fair point
of the Republic. So this is something that's happened, I would argue, in the last, let's say, 20 years. And you want to talk about social media, right? I mean, like the algorithms are designed to to polarize us. They're addictive. They encourage tribalism, right? Like, from like an, be in your camp, like type of deal.
Yeah.
And look, you read about this, dude, you read about this like abroad. Like, I mean, people get radicalized online. Like, and again, I'm not comparing this to the parties, but I'm just saying like you can literally be radicalized in that way, right? And so again, I don't know that I don't know that I don't know that I can comment on like, are we more polarized, are we less polarized? But I think by and large nothing is perfect, right? Like perfect is the enemy of the good, right? And it's like the old adage, right? Like you can please some of the people some of the time and all of the people some of the time, but you can't please all the people all the time, right? Yep. You're never going to hit 100 out of 100. That's just like, even if you had a system where there were like 50 parties in this country, you're inevitably you're going to go with one where you're like, I agree with them 90+% of the time. So, okay, instead there are two parties and you agree with one 70+% of the time. Like it creates a more stable environment for governance. Overall, if you're looking at different models of democracy and participation. Now, within the two-party system, I think there are certainly things that can be done, and we talked about this too, that would be like healthier for the future of the country. Like, for example, we have term limits in Florida, right? In DC, you don't, right? Not in the legislature.
Which is
right?
crazy.
Which is crazy because, look, at the end of the day, like, I've heard arguments for term limits where it's like, well, it gives lobbyists all the power because you know more than the elected official does. Like, that depends on the length of the term limit, right? Like, if the term limit's too short, sure.
That also depends on how good of a lobbyist they are.
Well,
too.
Sure, fine, but at the end of the day, you know, the idea is that you want more citizen participation in service, right? You know, also the way certain districts can be gerrymandered, right? So you've got like all of these seats that are like very, very, very safe. So you have people that, like, you know, there's no, you know, sometimes in situations like that, there isn't proper accountability. So I could make that argument.
Sometimes I'd say a lot of the time.
Yeah, but
there is truly no accountability.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is, because there are elections, and if, you know, and there have been instances where if someone is not, you know, if not up to the challenge, they're primaried even in that environment. That happens from time to time.
But I think too, even with elections, you see, and I think this administration, that's, you know, the presidential administration.
Can I actually
today,
say one more thing? Because I want to make one more point. Like, the other interesting stat, right, is like, I think more people participated in this past election, you know, in the presidential election than ever before, right? And so, you know, if you're going to judge the health of a democracy, judge it based...
Technically speaking, that's not true. Technically speaking, the election prior had more voters.
Well... Anyway,
putting our tinfoil hat aside for a second. I want to make sure that with the facts that are available, without us diving too deep.
If you look at,
I agree with you.
During this period of
holding you accountable for your
during this period of polarization, as you call it. Okay, there's been greater participation in our democracy than ever before.
That's a fair statement.
Okay, and so at the end of the day, like, if you're looking at the health of a democracy and you're going to measure it by citizen participation, there's more of that now than ever.
Yeah. Right.
And so I think that, like, as a country, you know, just like structurally, I think we're in a good place. Personally, I'm very excited about the administration that has just come in terms of DC. Yeah. Not that I want to talk about like everything, like this isn't, you know, like we're talking about like government affairs as opposed to politics.
We can talk, this is the long form.
Yeah, we can talk about anything.
Whatever you want. But I think here's my point in saying this. I think seeing RFK join Trump's administration is, I think, a very undervalued move by a lot of people. And the reason I think that is, I think that's, number one, what helped Trump win.
Well, we talked about this before the election.
Yeah, we did.
We talked about this before the election, and I was the one, I don't know if you remember this. I said to you, I said, don't underestimate that.
Yeah.
Like, you know, anyone who's dismissing that is missing it. Yeah. Right? He has a following on his issues, and specifically relating to like to health, right? And that's why he is where he is, where like there are some families that are incredibly motivated that are with him for that reason. And he's talking about things that no one is talking about. Right. So, and there wasn't a whole lot of comment on like RFK. Like, they're kind of like, a few people mentioned it, but like the quote unquote legacy media did not really. Right. And that to me was massive. Just like when Trump did Joe Rogan. Right. And it was like, I think I even called you and I said, the election's over. Like, this is done. Like, there's no, like, the you know, and we're on a podcast, right? Like, this is it, right? Like, talking about the changes in you know, how people like receive information, like, you know, now, and there's been a recognition of that by the White House, right? There's a reason why like podcasters and online media outlets are now at the White House briefing room next to more traditional outlets, because that's the reality. It's good. It's good for the country.
It's amazing. It's not just good, it's amazing. And here's why.
There shouldn't be a monopoly on information.
Is I believe that what RFK joining the Trump administration did for this country is show two things. And these are two things that you could go back. I've been doing this podcast now for almost 4.5 years, maybe past 4.5 years. Yeah. Two things I've talked about. The first item is more recent for sure, but that's the pendulum is shifting. And what I've meant by that is, I've been saying that over and over again, is we are seeing this tying in. Now, the second thing I want to say is the ability to agree to disagree, I believe, is coming back. And the reason I believe that is because we see RFK joining the Trump administration. Do they agree upon everything? Absolutely not. But the core issues that are important to not only RFK, to Trump, but also humanity and America has allowed them to put their differences aside, to come together, to better help the people. And that is something that I don't think we would have seen 4 years ago.
Well, so that's a national take, but I'm gonna give you a state take.
Okay.
Because that's, the universe that and locally the universe.
Do you agree? Before you ask, do you agree with that? For someone in your position,
do I think that
the pendulum is shifting, that people are more willing to have a conversation now on both sides from a voter standpoint?
So that's a hard question, because I don't know that I don't know that it ever really went away. I mean, I think it did in some rooms.
Oh, I'll tell you, for my age, I have been in a classroom at a public university where I was in that classroom.
Yeah, but universities are well known for shutting down free speech and freedom of thought.
Fair
I mean,
point.
that's like those.
But this was not.
Universities are like indoctrination centers for the left.
But this was not a.
Except in Florida.
This was a conversation
That's not the case
between
here.
me and another peer, a person in my class, a kid at the time that was in my class. We had a disagreement about a topic, and in the middle of that class, they got up and walked out of the room. And I looked at the professor. I'm pretty sure I've told this story in older episodes. I looked at the professor and I'm basically like, you're allowing this to happen. How is society productively going to move forward, going to progress and get better? If you are supposed to be the leader in this classroom that should sit there and say, hey, don't leave. He can have his view. You can have your view. And you guys should both try and see eye to eye. And maybe you can't. And if you can't, great. Shake hands. And this is why America is America. I think my way. You think your way.
That professor doesn't care about free speech. That's the point.
Maybe not. I actually happen to like the professor.
Really?
He's actually a guy from Israel. I happen to like him.
Okay.
But I called him out on his bullshit. Like,
good for
I
you.
happen to always be the student that would call him out.
Not
not just him, but other professors as well.
Yeah.
And I'll say, like, publicly, I went to a very liberal school where I was not a liberal in that classroom, and I stuck out like a sore thumb.
There's a reason why there are so many organizations now that are like committed to campus free speech and conservative values on campus. There's a reason why, like, for example, here in Boca, right? Like, Adam Hasner was just named the new president at FAU, right? He's the former majority leader of the Florida House, conservative, right? And you're seeing that in all over Florida, right? I mean, that's
another sign to me that we are healing, because that wouldn't have happened, in my opinion, 4 to 8 years ago.
So I think that a lot. So I'll finish the national conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot is changing very rapidly because of the fact that we have a new president who understands all of this and understands like how to navigate it and how to fix it. Right. So I think it, I'll say that. But at the state level, in terms of like the ability to cooperate and get stuff done and that sort of thing, like, my experience, over the last 10 years has been, like, by and large, I have been in private social settings with Democrats and with Republicans in the same room where everyone gets along, everyone communicates, people socialize together. In DC, it's less like that from what I understand. But again, Florida is really, state and local is where I exist.
Yeah.
It is, I mentioned this story downstairs. I mean, there is a member of the Florida legislature who is like one of the, this person is on national media outlets on the left as a very like loud voice on the left. And like in Tallahassee, again, where, the conservative viewpoint is the dominating viewpoint. He's come right up to me and said, hey, Matt, what's going on, Matt? Like, nobody, like, really. And so it is, at the state level, 90+% of like what runs through our legislature is voted on unanimously or near unanimously. There's only a couple of issues where it's partisan and there's there's sides. And at the local level, it's even less like that because, like, for example, like Palm Beach County, like the county commission, like you could have like to say that someone is supportive of the business community, right? That's a local issue. Okay. You could have a Republican candidate who you'd think would be pro-business that isn't, that could be anti-development for some reason. And then have a Democrat who might be like, a Democrat, but locally is pro-business or pro-development. Right. And so a lot of times those issues don't like as you sort of get into the world of local politics, they don't marry up exactly or at all really to like what is going on nationally. Those are somewhat divorced from one another. So, I mean, I can sit here and talk about national stuff all day and like the political zeitgeist, but like the world that I primarily operate in professionally is here in Florida at the state and local level. And it's a little bit divorced from what's going on in DC.
For sure.
Yeah.
And that's why
from a like a culture standpoint.
And that is literally the reason why I started this off by asking. Florida is more unified, it seems like, than a lot of other states, which I think makes your job, easy is the wrong word because it's not easy. It's just more efficient, in my opinion. Whereas in other states that I have had the opportunity to lobby in for certain issues, it is not that straightforward because there is a much bigger division within that
you could
state.
have a governor from one party and a legislature from another.
Exactly.
Or you could have like a Republican speaker and a Democrat Senate president.
Exactly.
And you're navigating, that's another layer of complexity. But even when you have single party, like even when you have one party controlling everything, there still can be disagreements on these issues because they're not necessarily partisan.
And let me say this, you have disagreements on those issues because,
on the local stuff
because you have to choose one side or the other side. Just because you're on one side, and I think this is the biggest misconception from people my age that just can't process this, is just because they're on one side doesn't mean they all think the same.
Right.
Doesn't mean they all believe the same thing. It's just this is the way the country is set up. This is the way we operate based upon, I agree with you. I studied social relations and policy. That's what my degree is in as well. And I believe that there is this underlying misunderstanding where you it's almost like, no, well, I'm associating with this party because I believe every single thing that party says. It's like, that's not the majority of elected officials, of voters. It's you're forced to choose one side or the other for the benefit, for the positive of the country. But because you do that does not mean that everyone thinks the same.
No,
that everyone wants
the
same thing.
No,
but that is, I think, the misunderstanding of my age group. And I think it's the lack of education, right? They haven't been able to see this curtain pull back that now we're seeing on a federal stage of what's actually going on and what's actually taking place. And here's the other thing too, that I'll always be very direct with you. I think that your view is a little bit more biased in Florida. And the reason being is if you're a Democrat in Florida, what do you have to do? You got to play ball with the other side. They're in control. They're in control. So if you're unwilling to play ball, guess what? You're going to run your term and you're going to be out of there because you did nothing productive. You tried to be like, have a hard hat on. And
yeah, but there are plenty of, and again, if you're talking about like the state legislature, there are plenty of Democrats in the state legislature that do take that approach. Maybe because they're trying to run for higher office.
Right.
But
has it worked out for them?
Sometimes they do end up getting elected into Congress or something like that. No, it just, some people are play politics. I mean, on both sides.
Right.
Look, every situation is unique.
And no. And I don't want this to be misconstrued saying this only happens on one side.
Right.
This absolutely happens on both sides. I just think in Florida, you're saying I've had closed doors conversations with Democratic elected officials and they're, totally normal. Well, I think in Florida, that is the environment here, right? That's the only way things are actually going to get done.
I think it also depends on the issue.
Very true.
Right. So like, you're
something very interesting in Florida. You saw marijuana.
It lost. Yeah, it lost.
It lost. And
That's
you
right.
had a lot of people supporting it, and you had the governor very, very against it, and it lost. And they spent a lot of money to do that.
They spent a lot of money in the for column too.
They even had Trump. They had Trump come out.
Yeah, so that amendment, there was a lot of money spent on both sides with respect to that amendment, but ultimately it didn't get the 60% that was needed to pass under Florida law. So,
which is great because it was a terrible law in the first place.
Which was?
The legalization. The language, putting it in the Florida Constitution.
So I am, I'll speak for myself now, not about that, but just in general. I am always of the belief that, always is a strong word. I'm generally of the belief that when you're talking about a constitution, right, like it should be sacrosanct, right? Like in the United States Constitution, there's like 27 amendments, right? In Florida, it just seems like every cycle there's like, a dozen amendments. amendments that end up on the ballot because of the sort of citizen process, right? And so there's actually a lot of talk in Tallahassee right now, and I agree with it, that process needs to be cleaned up. Like, as voters, we shouldn't be asked to circumvent the legislature every single election by having to vote on constitutional amendments unless they're issues that are like legitimately constitutional, right?
I think that makes logical sense.
Right. Like, so if something is, if something is like, if it was something dealing with like the structure of the Florida legislature that's in the Constitution, right? That's constitutional, right? But something like, something like medical marijuana or some medical marijuana, recreational use marijuana, like the legislature, like that's the proper place for it to be addressed.
Right.
Like that's just the reality of it. And so, for me, the Constitution should be reserved for like actual stuff that needs to be in the Constitution and not stuff decided by the elected legislature. And by the way, like, people make the, and this is true at the federal level too, people like to say that we live in a democracy. We don't. We live in a constitutional republic. And that's a really, really important.
Explain the difference for people that don't understand it.
So a democracy is the idea that, like, the people are sort of directly in charge, and it's like voting by like majority fiat.
Yeah.
Right. It's like mob rule in a way. That's democracy. A constitutional republic is where you have elected representatives that are your voice in government, and there is a constitution that governs that structure. Right. That's what we have in this country. And it's part of the reason why, again, getting back to like the two-party system, it's why we've had such a stable government in this country going back 2 centuries now, compared to this is the truth of the matter is, like, nothing is perfect, but this is the best system and the best country in the history of the world by far, period. Right. And so, and that's just, you can't really argue with that. That's just true.
And if you do try and argue with that,
well, then, you're un-American. No, I mean, it's the truth, right? And so
I would say go explore and educate yourself on other countries.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. And so, look, we live in a constitutional republic, and that means that for, issues that are properly addressed, public policy issues that are properly addressed, they're addressed by your elected representatives in government. They're not addressed where, like, 1 million people sign up and then you can like have this other document over here that like circumvents the elected representatives. It doesn't work like that.
What is your take on having non-career politicians now really getting involved into politics? Do you like it? Do you not like it? How do you see it impacting the landscape?
So when you say non-career politicians,
I mean like a Donald Trump. I never held an elected position before, ran for president and won.
Well, right. So non-career politicians at the federal level is very unusual because typically the people that are elected to Congress have held office elsewhere before they get to Congress.
Okay.
There's exceptions to that. Sometimes there are business leaders that are, but as you get down into, like, again, state and local government, like, that actually happens a lot, right? So like Rick Scott, for example, was governor of this state for 8 years, and he was a business executive, and he defeated someone who was a career politician to get elected the first time in the Republican primary. In our state legislature, it is definitionally a part-time position. Like, these people are paid like $30,000 a year. They're up in Tallahassee for half the year. They all have real jobs. They're not professional politicians. They're just not, right? And then as you go further down, like county commissioners, like they all like literally are like,
it's like a volunteer.
Yeah. They're like, well, they get paid, but it's like, like they're like, okay, I'm doing this, but then I'm like over here and I'm a financial advisor.
Yeah.
And then you get to the city and it's like actually like that, where they're like, they're a lawyer, they're at their law office during the day and then they go, sit on a city council at night because they believe in public service. Right. And so, the idea of a career politician, I think, speaks more to like what we talked about earlier with term limits.
Yep.
Right. And again, in Florida, you don't have these people that have been in the legislature for 1 million years. Now, some people sort of bounce back and forth a little bit, but like you by and large don't have that because of term limits. And I think if you put that in place in DC too, in Congress, you would see something similar.
Yeah. I love talking to you about this stuff. I always love our phone conversations
and
this one because it's fascinating. your approach and your
This is very different than the short form.
Yeah, of course. And your
This is very different than the short form.
Yeah, of course. It is
We're just like way off like but it's good. This is just, we're just,
it's very interesting because you get to live and breathe this every day and I don't. But I'm fascinated by it. I keep up with it. Whether that is, I think this is a message. I think I've said this before, maybe not. I think one of the most undervalued things that any American citizen does is not take their local elected officials' positions seriously. That is what impacts your day-to-day life. That is what impacts your environment in which you live in. And that impacts the future for your family if you have one. And not enough people, like myself included, honestly, I say this, but I'm talking about myself too, is the last election, I called you. I'm like, Matt, I didn't even know some of these people were
Sorry, you have to forgive me. I feel like my nose is running.
No,
a
you're
little
okay.
bit.
That were on the ballot. And I'm like, you're like, well, you should have called me and I could have walked you through who's who and what's what.
100%.
And it's like, well, there needs to be.
I get calls like that a lot.
There needs to be.
Like from everyone.
Yeah,
They're
I
like,
believe
Matt,
it.
who do I vote for?
Yeah.
Like, I know who to vote for president, but after that, like, what do I do?
And that's sad, though.
Literally, I get calls like that all the
It's
time.
sad. And I would love to see somebody do something to fill that gap, because at the end of the day, you need something for your house. You have a pipe burst. You need to get it fixed. Guess what? You got to go to the city. You got to talk to them. And if they are inefficient, if they don't move as fast as you need them to, you're stuck at whatever their pace is.
How about forget like if your pipe bursts. How about if you're building a house? How about if you're building a development?
Yeah.
Right? And you're dealing with a city or a county on an issue. How about
you're building an office building that's bringing jobs into the city or into an area, into a region?
Or if you have a water project that needs a permit and you're dealing with like DEP, the state DEP, right? I mean, like, there's so much.
What's DEP?
The state's Department of Environmental Protection.
Okay, got it.
I'm just saying, like, you hit the nail.
They have that in Florida?
They do.
No, just kidding with you.
Well, I could make an argument, a really strong one, and I think this is being talked about, is like at the federal level, whether or not the EPA is like even really necessary, because like the states could do it. Right. Yeah. And Florida has a pretty robust DEP from, just in terms of how everything is regulated.
That's another thing that, again, my age group, big misconception. They think giving it back to the states is the worst thing in the world. You are stupid. Let me tell you that. Right. You are stupid.
Well, when you give it back to the states, you have more direct control over everything. And that's to the point you just made, right?
And what you can do, guess what? You can choose where you live. We live in America. Where you live is a choice. Whether you're financially able to do that or not is a different story. But again, in America, you have the opportunity to work and to provide income.
People during COVID voted with their feet in like mass migrations, right? I mean, that's exhibit A, right? But
I really want people, and I'm gonna let you finish after. I really want people that listen to this to understand that there are some issues, of course, we want it to stay at the federal level, but there are a lot of issues where when you give it back to the state, it works out. Why? Because the people in that state are creating their own environment. Whereas on the national level, that's much more challenging to do. And that's why I think not enough people pay attention to local politics, whether that's city, whether that's a state level, because they're just unaware, and that's not what's on the news.
All right, Maverick, ready? Do you know who your state representative is?
Well, where?
Here.
No.
Do you really not?
No.
Oh, wow. Okay.
No. Who is it?
She's a good friend of mine, actually.
Is it the same for me in Highland Beach?
It's the same for you as Highland Beach.
Okay. Are you sure?
Yes. I thought about it for a second. Yes,
okay. Sure. All right. Who is it?
So she's great. She's actually a good friend of mine. Her name's Peggy Gossett-Seidman.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that when you asked, but now that I see or I hear the name, yes. Yeah. We've talked about Peggy before.
I'm sure we have. But it's just funny because I'm like, Maverick, we're talking about state
and
electeds.
That's what I said. It's me too. I'm talking about myself.
But it's interesting, right? And so I like you are right in everything you said in terms of like how much local elections matter. And I make this point to people all the time where it's like, oh, well, I don't live in a swing state, so like, why do I need to vote for president? Who cares? And I'm just like, don't you get it? This isn't about voting. I mean, president's like really, really important, but like who your state house member is, your state senator, your county commissioner, or your city councilman, like those people are making decisions that will impact you like day to day in some instances way more than the president will,
public
right?
school.
Public schools. Oh, the school board is huge. I mean, there was a school board election here in Boca this year, which was like massively impactful.
Yeah.
And this seat sort of opened up for the first time in a while because actually school district's the one area in Florida where there are term limits, but they don't actually go into effect until 2030. So now, current board members are sort of like grandfathered in. But like your local elections really matter.
So wait, how does that work? Does that mean if they're in now, they get to stay in, and then come time 2030, they have to have an election? Or is it only if you're elected after 2030 that you have to?
The clock starts ticking, I believe, in 2030.
Okay. All right. Got it.
If you're in now.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So where was I going with this? So we were talking about so giving it back to the states.
Yeah.
So when you give power back to states and back to local government, it is definitionally closer to the people. But then there's another interesting fissure, right? In terms of like the state and local government. Sometimes you have conflicts between state legislatures and then local counties and cities, right? So like in Florida, you have like the Florida League of Cities and the Florida Association of Counties that are representing cities and counties. And then you have the legislature over here, and those interests may not be aligned, right? So you might have situations where the legislature wants to preempt local government's ability to regulate certain things. And I'll give you the classic example is paper versus plastic, right? So like imagine if Publix had to deal with 410 different rules on whether or not they can have paper versus plastic bags based on what city they're in. The compliance costs for that would be absolutely enormous.
Yeah.
Publix couldn't do business that way. And so it makes sense to have the legislature say, we're going to preempt cities and counties from regulating that activity. We're going to do it at the state level. At the state level. There's also an argument that there's more process at the state level in terms of committees and public input versus at a county or a city where it's like could be 5 people and you need 3 votes and that's it, right? Yeah. And so there's some like interesting tension that goes on there, but the overall umbrella statement of like the importance of local elections, the decisions that are made, and the fact that like giving power back to the states is generally a good thing is absolutely true across the board.
Yeah. And I think the one thing that
education, by the way, that's an area that's being talked about right now where if, I personally think like the federal government should absolutely be out of education. If you want to, have programs and funding, give those programs to state departments of ed and let them run with it.
I want to come back to that because the question I do want to ask you is, it's unfortunate. Like I said 5-10 minutes ago, I don't know. I don't know these things, right? Like I should know them. And somebody in my position where I have access to the resources, it's unfortunate that I don't know.
Listen, I asked you that as like a half joke. I mean, but look, at the end of the day, no one knows that stuff.
No, but this is my point of asking you this next question.
It's like, it's my world.
Where does somebody learn about this? Where do they get involved? What do they do?
Yeah, that's a great question.
To understand who the players are that are even involved? Who should they vote for? What are they standing on? Because it's not in the media. You don't see it. Even on the local news, you're not seeing it.
Well, or you're reading a local newspaper endorsement, which is politicized.
Exactly.
And through an agenda. Like whoever, like I'm in a position now, like when I read a local newspaper endorsement, I generally vote for the other person. I actually and I mean, I know the people, by the way, so I don't ever need to read it.
Right.
But like local newspaper endorsements are not worth anything. I could argue that they haven't been worth anything for years and years. But to your point, right? Like 50 years ago, people were like, "Ooh, who did the local paper endorse?" Now, like, I wouldn't even waste your time with that.
But do you think that changed?
It's usually like a 25-year-old reporter who's like asking questions that doesn't even know what's going on.
Do you think, though, that change that's happened over time is because of the degrading value, I should say the degrading values and ethics that these publications have? Like, do you think
I think they all have agendas. That's what the issue is.
But has that always been a constant?
So I think in my lifetime, I think that it has gotten worse, and I'm 42.
Yeah. Right.
So I can speak to my like adult life, which is, the last 25 years ish. It was very obvious to me 25 years ago, and now it's been exposed, so it's very obvious to everyone. But these, they have an agenda. It is way left of center, and for a long time it was not known or exposed,
or it's very right of center. You have to remember.
No, I'm talking about local papers. I'm talking about local papers.
I know a paper in where we are currently sitting where it's more right-leaning than ever, and it's a local paper.
Well, I'm talking about the paper. So like here it would be like the Palm Beach Post, for example.
Okay,
is what I'm talking about. But yes, I mean, listen,
But you have here. See, this is what I think is very interesting. You have in Palm Beach County an age demographic that is older, and so what do? They lean on those local publications
less and less,
and that's exactly what I'm saying.
It's
gonna start fading out.
So
those
to
things
answer your
are
question,
gonna not hold us weight.
Where do you go to get information about? The parties have gotten very smart about putting out information, right?
Have they though?
Yeah, no, there are voter guides that are out now,
okay.
and certainly that there are stakeholder groups locally that are that make endorsements of candidates, and you can sort of do some research on certain organizations to figure out who they've endorsed. So if the organization aligns with your way of thinking and they put out a list of endorsed candidates, then you can go by that.
Yeah.
So that's and then I have I have friends that put out their own voter guides, but that's these are political folks that are that are influential.
What is your take on making sure that the elected officials, whether it's local, whether it's state, federal, we see, I think, more communication just publicly, right? More communication on socials. But in your local and your state, I don't think you see a ton of communication happening because I don't think people are paying attention. How can we communicate with these people in an effective
with
manner?
Elected officials, you mean?
Online. Yeah, because let me phrase it like this to you. I was recently presented, we haven't even talked about this or had a chance to. I was recently presented with this opportunity that I did not do, quite honestly, just because of bandwidth issues. I would love to do it.
Yep.
But it's basically setting up a marketing agency for local and state officials, meaning they don't really run their own social media. If they do, it's not good. If they don't, they really don't have it in general. And then if they are running social media campaigns or putting out content, it's because there is a campaign and an election coming up. They're not just doing it to give the messaging.
That's not true.
Well,
there are absolutely consultants that do that. I'm telling you, no, it's true.
Yeah,
it's true. And they do, but it is.
But you don't see that as the majority of elected officials doing that.
More and more.
More and more.
More and
That's
more
great, though. That's
more
positive.
And more are. I mean, look, a lot of it is like money issues. I mean, that costs money.
That's why this came across my desk.
Yeah, that costs money. Every month, and to the extent that you've got locally elected officials, they're probably paying for something like, they're not paying for it out of an office account. That wouldn't be legal, I don't think.
No, you can't. We
right.
looked into that.
It depends. If it's like constituent education, they could do it. But if it's like campaign messaging, they can't. And that's a very fine line. They're not opening campaign accounts until, right before an election. Maybe they have a political committee that could do it. But again, then they're like, you're asking them to go out and raise money to pay for, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And again, local officials are also like, they have day jobs, right? So like, they're not necessarily like full-time on this stuff. But some of them do. I mean, at the state level, definitely they have like consultants that, do digital marketing and that sort of thing. That's not just, hey, it's campaign season.
And this is the problem. Marketing is the
they all, by the way, they all have email newsletters that go out from their offices, but that's constituent education.
Yeah.
But they all do that. I mean, I'm telling you, I get like, I don't even know how many email blasts I get every day.
And you're talking at the state level, right?
At the local level too. County commissioners do it. City councilmen do it.
I guess they do
newsletters.
The county commissioner, I would always.
Yeah, they're like, here's what I've been doing this month, and if you need me, here's how you contact my office.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point.
They do that. They're good at that, and it's by email.
That's a fair point. It's interesting because I think, right, like my knowledge is Florida and Michigan mostly.
Okay.
And it's so
very different states.
That's what I was just about to say. It's very interesting to see the extreme dynamic differences between each state's political environment because it is drastically different. And it's different in a way of even like when you talk, like, let me ask you this question.
Sure.
Do you have friends, like your core friend group, let's say for the past 25 years of your adulthood life,
okay,
that have opposing political views as you do?
Yes.
Okay. Now,
wait, so you're asking me if I have friends today that I've been friends with for 25 years that have opposing political views?
Or just friends in general that have opposing political views?
Yes, a couple.
Okay.
A couple, yes.
Now, you go to Michigan, that answer is a lot more than a couple. And it's funny because the environment we live in, it's mostly conservative. And especially the areas in which you and I reside in, it's mostly conservative.
Well, Boca Raton, for example, is like in the last 2 elections now has been red.
That's my point.
That is a new thing. This used to be very blue, and now it isn't. Part of that is migration. Part of that is people just changing their views on certain things.
100%.
Part of that is realignment of the parties. I mean, the parties have changed. I could make the argument, by the way, and I do make this argument, that if you match up like Trump ideologically, Trump is not this like right-wing guy. He's like right of center. I mean, he's from a policy standpoint, like people in the press like to get all over Trump because they say, oh, he says this and says that, but like that's all noise. Like from a policy standpoint, Trump is actually pretty mainstream.
Yeah.
Right. But the Democrat Party has gone way left from a policy standpoint, and so you have a lot of people that are just like, well, I'm for the normal guy.
Yeah. I want to rephrase what you're saying in a way of also the Democratic, elected, let's put it this way. Kamala Harris,
yeah,
way more left than obviously Trump is far right. Right?
Yes.
So I think that's what you're saying, because I think also what you said is like the Democratic Party is also very left. I think you could say the same about the Republican Party, right? Like you have Trump, obviously, sure, a little bit right of center, but the Republic.
I don't agree. I don't agree with that. Ideologically, I don't agree with that. I don't.
Interesting.
I don't.
Explain.
No, I don't. I think, if you like for example, okay, if you look at someone like Bill Clinton, who was elected president in the 1990s, I mean, Bill Clinton ran a crime bill. See,
that's the thing. Like I was...
No, I know, but I'm just telling you, like Bill Clinton ran a crime bill, okay? Like there's like that's not something that today would fly in his party like for a second, right? That's my point.
What do you mean by a crime bill? Give me the specifics.
Like it was like a mass incarceration bill. The idea was to be like tough on crime, right?
Okay.
Like, could you imagine a Democrat today running on a law and order platform? Like I can't.
Well, right? Everything is, but that's always in history that everything switches. Like,
well, you can have realignments.
Pro war, pro peace.
No, you can have realignments, but I guess like my general point is that if you just look at it like ideologically, right? Like the Republican Party has sort of more or less stayed where it is, and the Democrat Party, the base, has kind of gradually moved to now it's like very, very left.
Yeah.
Like if you look at like, sort of who their thought leaders are versus who like our thought leaders are, it's completely, it's completely different.
I think the example that comes to mind, and I really don't want to get into specifics on this because it's so polarizing.
This is very different than the last podcast we did.
Yeah, for sure.
This isn't about lobbying at all. We're just talking about No. I mean like the one we did in my office.
Yeah.
Which was much more like, hey, let's talk about lobbying
more
and how
Q&A.
that works. Well, I was gonna say this is like we're just doing political takes now.
And the reason I
don't mind it. It's just very interesting.
The reason I'm taking in this direction is because I think people view you as somebody, you're not an elected official,
That's
but
true.
You're in politics all day, every day for
That's true.
The past decade, essentially. What do you think about the younger generation in the political world now? Like you've been in politics for a long time. You started at a young age, and as you've gotten older, I'm sure you've started to see the influx of younger generation coming in, whether it's an aide, whether it's an intern. How do you see them operate? Are you confident in the future? Do you see light at the end of the tunnel? Whereas I think, in the past couple of years, we've been scared that there was not a ton of light at the end of the tunnel.
I get a chance to work with some incredibly talented people. And there are talented people in the political process of all ages. So I wouldn't, for me, and especially true looking at staff, right? I wouldn't draw the fault line on age. I would draw it based on talent. And so
what's talent mean to you?
You know, they understand policy, they understand relationships, they understand the role of their member or their committee or whatever, right? Or their commissioner, as the case may be.
Right.
So for me, I think it's nice to be able to interact with, you know, public servants, not just elected officials, but public servants who are, you know, who have talent and care about what they do and want to work with you to, you know, to get something done.
Do you see them being more drastic, like more, you know, either all right wing, left wing, like there's not a lot of centralized thinking, or do you say it's pretty?
Well, I think it depends where you are, right? So like if you're in the legislature where you're talking about, you know, certain aides to members that are one party of another, you're going to find, you know, ideological fault lines. If you're talking about like committee staff directors that have been there for a million years, I mean, like they're there to do a job. Like they're not, you know, they're not necessarily one party or another. Although in Tallahassee, you know, the red team is, you know, predominates for sure.
Yeah.
You know, in local government, you talk to staff that are, you know, again, both stripes, but party breakdown is less relevant because the issues you're dealing with don't necessarily, you know, they're not always ideological. You can have people who, like I said, might be a conservative, like Republican nationally, but then locally they're like, you know, anti-business. And it's sort of like, even though like nationally the Chamber and the Club for Growth and all those business organizations are typically Republican, it doesn't always trickle down when you're dealing with local stuff.
Yeah. What about the change, like I talked about previously? Like, do you agree that parties shift over time? Meaning, like the way one party thought is now the way the other party thinks.
Well, I think what's happened in this country, it's funny, I took a class on this in college called The Rise of the Southern Republicans. You've had so in this country for like 200 years, you had parties that where the fault lines were not necessarily ideological, right? They were regional in some cases. They might be based on like one predominant issue, right? But they weren't like ideological in the way that we think about it now. Mm-hmm. But since 1980, they have increasingly moved in that direction, and now they are that way. Mm-hmm. So this is like the first time in American history where you really have two ideological parties as opposed to like a northern party and a southern party, so to speak, right? Or a big government party and a states party, right? Yeah. Like those aren't quite the same things. But yeah, man, I mean, of course parties evolve and change their thinking over time. They're influenced by personalities. They're influenced by issues, you know, and developments in policy.
Yeah, I think too, having this conversation on a podcast like this is interesting because I think a lot of people would be fearful to have this conversation and put this conversation out. And I think obviously someone in your position, you are a lobbyist, you live, breathe, eat, sleep politics. So for you, this is not an unusual conversation. What's unusual is there's a microphone and cameras in front of us and lights, but it's not unusual to have this conversation. Yeah. The one thing I will say is,
well, we're having a conversation about structure, right? So it's not like we're sitting here talking like specific issues and positions.
Fair point.
Like,
Fair point.
So, but even still, I mean, I ran for office like a few years ago. Like my positions on issues are generally known.
Right. My point in saying all of this is that I think that what's very cool to me to see is that I don't think this conversation could have happened in the past couple of years. And the reason being for that is I think we saw this societal shift of what was allowed to be talked about and what's not. And I don't mean allowed like what is a platform censoring. Put all that nonsense aside for a second. I mean, what is going to get you crucified by some group or put in the best light possible by another group?
Yeah.
And I think too, right? These conversations are what fuel growth and what fuel thinking and forward thinking. And, oh yeah, okay, I didn't really think about it the way Matt was talking about before I talked to him. But now that I'm thinking about it, it makes a lot of sense the way he thinks. And maybe I should listen and think through. His thinking seems more logical than my thinking. Can his thinking, change the way I think? And I think a lot of people don't have the ability to go into a conversation like that. And Joe Rogan talks about this a lot. And it's basically this idea of your ego being attached to your ideas. And your idea is nothing more than an idea, right? And you need to have a very thick line separating your ideas and your egos, because I'm sure you've had this conversation with whether it's elected officials or whether it's clients, and you're like, guys, like, here's my thoughts on this. You actually just told me about a client. Here's my thoughts on how this should go. And they're like, no, it can't go that way. And then they start talking like this, and they're all mad and they're all frustrated, and then it's like, okay, clearly you're reacting out of your ego, right? Your ego is hurt. Your ego is impacted by what I'm saying, but this is just an idea I'm talking about, right? This is a social construct that I'm talking about. So put your ego aside for a second and think about this objectively. Think about it logically. Do you see that happening, or do you think people are really ingrained and attached to their ideas because of their ego?
So I think that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right? And so, a lot of what I do, and listen, I love to talk, right? But I know how to listen. Mm-hmm. And it's really important, in anything, but especially in my world and what I do, to always be listening.
Yeah.
Always be listening, because you never know, like, who's talking and what you're going to hear and what you're going to learn.
Yeah.
And so that's, if that's, that's the takeaway, right? Is always be listening to people, because you might learn something.
I think learning and absorbing.
You might learn something. And again, in my world, like, information is currency, and really valuable currency. Yeah. Right. I mean, I have clients all the time, like, call me. They're like, oh, what are you hearing? What are you hearing? I get that question a lot. What are you hearing? Oh, you talked to so-and-so.
I've asked you that question a bunch of times.
Right. You talked to so-and-so this morning. Okay. What did they say?
Right.
What did they say? Right. And sometimes it's what did they say, but then it's like body language. Right. Like I mean, this happened to me. I'm trying to think if this was last week or the week before, where I had a client do a meeting in Tallahassee with a certain staff person at an agency where I wasn't present. And that was on purpose. That was like by design and agreed to for a very important reason.
That's unusual for you.
It is because, but this was different. This was like operationally, and it was I don't know, not a lower level meeting, but it was more about operations of a program as opposed to like a strategy or anything like that. And I remember saying, like, I want to know about this person's body language, right? Like yes, you're going to be in the room with this person, but like, focus on that person's body language and let me know how that was. And I'm speaking very vaguely on purpose. Of
course, yeah.
But there's a reason, right? It's not just what people say. You can learn a lot just by looking and seeing. And so you always, you're always
aware of your surroundings.
Always aware of your surroundings. You're always mindful of that. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's important with anything in life, though.
It is.
You need to instill that into your kids.
Yeah, no, that's true. But
being aware of my surroundings is, I think, one of my biggest benefits in life. I think being hyper aware of my surroundings.
Yes.
Now sometimes I happen to be
especially now, like, everyone has a phone.
I happen to be what some people call a doomsday prepper. Not like, not like crazy. Like I don't, if I could afford a bunker, I would have a bunker. Not to say that I don't.
Well, that's okay, because when the time comes, Maverick, I'm just coming to your bunker.
Yeah.
I'll bring, just let me know how many rounds I need to bring with you, and we're there.
More food. I got the rounds covered.
Right.
I need you to bring food.
I'll bring like 100,000 rounds.
Yeah. But I think, it's sometimes sometimes being hyper aware of your surroundings can turn into paranoia, for sure. And
but I mean, like, again, I'm
not saying in your
advisor, right? I mean, like, in my world, it's just you're always listening. And like I said, I get that question. What are you hearing? Yeah. What did you hear? I get that question more than any other question, right? And again, I come back to, like, I have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So yeah, I mean, I love to talk. We've been sitting here talking for, I don't even know how long now. Yeah. Probably about an hour.
How long has this been, guys? How long have we been? Okay. Yeah. Cool.
Right. Cool. So we're like right on track then.
Yeah. Good. We're doing
that part will be edited out.
No.
Maybe.
No.
I don't know. But again, like I loved, we're having a great conversation. Yeah. But what are you hearing?
Yeah.
I get that all the time.
What What is the environment like right now with the new administration in the state of Florida? Obviously, he is a Florida guy. Trump is a Florida guy.
Yeah.
A lot of people in Florida are connected to Trump somehow, some way.
Yep.
So I'm sure everyone's
a lot of those people left Florida to go work for him.
And I'm sure there's some
we
people
talked about, like the chairs on the deck have been shuffled.
And I'm sure people are trying to claw onto that to try and ride that coattail as well. I'm sure. But like, what is the rhetoric? Are people excited? Are people happy? Are people really looking to like change the way things happen? Because we see that with Doge and other stuff that the federal government is doing. But is that trickling down into the state of Florida as well?
In the state?
Yeah,
absolutely. I think there is, listen, there's a lot going on in the legislature right now where the governor and the legislature are a little bit at odds with one another. But, across the board, there's an excitement. Everyone is very supportive of President Trump and wants to do anything they can to to help push his policy agenda forward, and that is in all things. So no, there is excitement. I mean, there's no question about that.
But more so than excitement, I ask, is there this motivation and rhetoric to really make a lot of good change? I guess Florida, that's been happening, I would assume.
Florida, you got to remember, Governor DeSantis has been governor since, 2018.
Right.
So as far as conservative governance in this state, and again, like I said, we had Rick Scott for 8 years before that. And then, the legislature has been, super majority Republican since the 90s.
Right.
So Florida has been a conservative governance state for decades now. Right. So, it's the reason why, for example, Florida is the leading state for universal school choice. Right. That's a big one. Right. And now other states are looking at that and they're how do we do what Florida did?
Meaning, elaborate on that.
Yeah. So that means, it's sometimes more commonly referred to as universal school vouchers. Right. So every parent, depending on, or let me back up. Traditionally, the way public school education is funded in Florida is there's a calculation of cost per pupil, and then there's a percentage that the state pays in through something known as the FEFP. Okay, that money went from the state to the districts for each individual kid, whether or not the kid was in private school or public school.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. Now the state said, "Oh no! That money follows the kid, not where you live." So that means if the parents say, I don't want my kid in public school, the parents can pull the child out of the public school, put the child in a private school, and that FEFP in Palm Beach County, it's $8,000, follows the kid.
So the private school
and
gets
deductions,
the money?
And yes. And it's distributed from from a third-party organization where the state gives the money. It's a little more complicated than that, but
got it.
Yes is the answer.
So basically money's coming from the state to a third party to the school.
Correct.
Tracking the kid.
Correct. It goes with the kid, which then lowers the cost of tuition by $8,300, and this is different in every county. Wow. But that's a big deal.
Is that a per year number?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah, the Family Empowerment Scholarship. So it's a game changer. It's an absolute game changer. It gives parents just a ton more control. So the movement towards greater parental control and rights has been ongoing in Florida since Jeb Bush was governor. Okay.
When was he governor?
From 98 to 06.
Okay.
Okay.
And there were born to 5 years old.
And there were different scholarship programs that were put into place to allow more kids to have more flexibility. And when Governor DeSantis became governor, that was accelerated rapidly until I think it was in 2022, I want to say 22 or 23. The legislature passed HB1, which is what I'm talking about. Not just certain kids are eligible for scholarships. It's essentially all kids are eligible for scholarships, and their FEFP allocation goes with them if they go to a private school.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm adjusting.
No, you're okay.
Adjusting the pillow.
So when did that whatever the empowerment, whatever,
the Family Empowerment Scholarship,
when did that become a thing in the state of Florida? Has it been around for a long time?
Well, the scholarship itself was created a couple of years before the HB1 passed.
Okay.
And they sort of slowly increased the eligibility, and then HB1 essentially said everyone is eligible.
Got it.
But the Family Empowerment Scholarship was the latest iteration of a long line of different scholarships. And then there's also like a separate branch of that scholarship for like special needs kids where they get more money because they have more needs.
I will say this. Growing up, I went to school in Michigan. I went to public school my entire life until my sophomore, junior, senior year of high school, in which I switched to a private Jewish day school.
Sure.
And that was my choice. I actually fought with my parents on that one, that they did not want me to go at first. But here's the thing I'll say. Growing up and coming from Michigan to Florida once a month, once every other month, twice a month sometimes, there was always this rhetoric that public schools in Florida were not good and were way worse than Michigan, to the point where when my family would think, are we going to move to Florida? Are we not? It was like,
I think it depends on where you live. I think it totally depends on where you live, because it's like public schools are still like most of their funding is still millage, right, from local property taxes. So like, you know, wealthier areas obviously are going to have better schools.
of course.
But again, like that speaks to like the, you know, like the fairness question. Like, why should kids be trapped in failing public schools when like they have parents that want to pull them out and they can go to a charter school, right? Or
charter schools
or
are
a
huge.
religious private school, right? And so I think with the public schools, it depends on where you live. I think Florida has some excellent public schools, but I think the larger conversation isn't like, oh, are these public schools good or not? That's not what it is. It's, at the end of the day, who should be in control of like a child's education, right? Is it like, you live here, so you have to do this? Is it the state? Is it, you know, some bureaucrat? Is it like, no, it's a parent. Obviously it's the parent.
Right.
And so you want to be able to give parents, and that means all parents, as much control and flexibility and resources as you possibly can to make the best choice for their kid. And again, I lobby some of these issues, so I'm very familiar with them. Like, you know, you are, you know, it also encourages parents to obviously be more bought into their child, but like, you know, again, it is for parents. They know best. Every child learns differently, right?
100%.
And the parent's going to know that best.
Yeah.
Right. And so like, I know like for my kids, for example, like like Sasha and I are going to make those decisions, right? Like no one's going to tell me, oh, you have to send your kid here. Now listen, we have resources, right? But not everyone does.
Right.
Not everyone does. And that's the theory behind it. And again, public schools are still here. They're still funded, you know, like Palm Beach County is like the 10th largest school district in America. You know, Miami-Dade is like third, and I think they're A or B districts. I think they're, you know, like there's, you know, they're doing well.
And
but it you know, they're competing, right? And that's the point. Like there are some parents who are going to say, you know what, public school is the right option. I'm going to send my child here because that's what I want, and good, do that.
Because there is a societal, there is a social conversing element to, I think, schooling, which is why for me and my family, my dad did go to private school his whole life, and he said it never taught him social skills. And so that's why
some parents want to homeschool their children, and I think they should be allowed to. I mean, ultimately,
I think they should be allowed to 100%.
I mean, the parent has to make that decision.
Yeah.
Period. And
but
stop.
You said
that's
something interesting where the parent knows the best way that their child learns.
Yep.
And I don't know if I necessarily agree with that.
I'm going to fight you. Go ahead.
I mean, I'm not saying I have an argument like I want to argue and debate you about it. I'm just saying my viewpoint. My parents are very involved parents. Do they know the best way that I learn? Absolutely fucking not. No, they just don't. They just don't.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
You're talking as an adult now. Okay.
Yeah.
Like who? I'm gonna.
No. I know where you're going.
To like 8-year-old.
That's why
Maverick.
I fought my parents to go to a private school. They thought it was better for me to go and stay on track and do what I was doing.
But that's in high school, right? I mean, look, at the end of the day, and again, but who's going to know better, right? At the end of the day, is it your parents or is it like someone at the school district?
No, of course the parents.
That's the argument.
Yeah.
That's the argument.
I get on a surface level, that's the argument. But going deeper, I think you have
your
lot of people.
Your parents raise you. They instill values in you. And so they're the ones who are ultimately going to be primarily responsible for guiding your education.
Yes. But I think you're seeing, talking about homeschool, you see a lot of parents homeschool, and now you're seeing the challenges that are being faced with homeschooling, meaning the parent doesn't know how to homeschool, right? What is the best way to teach my kid? Okay. It's trial and error.
Yeah. But at the same time, like the state isn't going to step between a parent and a child in that situation.
No, and they shouldn't.
And they shouldn't.
They shouldn't.
That's exactly right.
Just so we're clear, my argument is not that the state should be.
No,
I know
we're doing a podcast, and you're like taking me down different rabbit holes.
Yeah.
No, I got it. I'm just saying this is a policy area in Florida where Florida has led, where conservative governance has empowered parents, and it's a really, really good thing. And it's one of the reasons why Governor DeSantis was reelected by like 20 points.
And I think,
and then that, by the way, that outpaces registration. Like there are now more Republicans than Democrats in Florida, but like DeSantis won going away, right? Like he won Palm Beach County by 3 points after like in 2020, like Trump lost it by like a significant margin, right? Now that was different in 24. So a lot of that was migration. Like now it's closer, but my point is there is a huge shift going on, and like, DeSantis, when he got reelected on all of this stuff, like there were obviously Democrats that voted for him there, and one of the things you always hear is you hear about like the school choice moms, right? Who, it could be like black single moms whose kids are in a charter school who were able to, thank God, send their kids to that school because of the family empowerment scholarship, that are voting for DeSantis because like he made that happen.
Right.
And, with the legislature.
And I think, again, there's a lot to uncover, but I think talking about DeSantis and education, one of the most badass moments, and I'm going to talk in generals here, so don't slip up and talk in specifics.
Okay.
There's been a room where you and I have been in before when we were lobbying a certain issue. And in that room, the person wanted to make sure that there was no nonsense in the curriculum. And literally, I can't remember exactly word for word what they said, but it was something along the lines of like, DeSantis is never going to put up with anything bad in this curriculum that's going to, be seen as negative or be seen as trying to indoctrinate the children, which I thought was badass. Like that was very cool to hear that. And it gives someone like me.
Well, that's the law in Florida. The legislature passed a statute change on that too.
Yeah. But it was very cool to hear that and to know that whether you agree with it or not, there are certain things that I believe should not be taught in school and should be taught at home. And honestly, I can't say vice versa because you could teach homeschool and do things like that. But I think there are specialty things that should be taught by professionals. So I think that's what makes homeschool hard per se.
People vote with their feet, right? And so in response to, bringing back the education issue for a second, right? Like people were tired of like public school districts like force masking their kids, right?
Yeah. So
they moved here.
Yeah.
And because the philosophy here is we are going to empower parents.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
And that is something that listen, like I said, welcome to the free state of Florida.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that is that's
I will say this to you. The older I get, the more life I go through, the more mature I get, the more I realize that at the end of the day, government regulation is not, in my opinion, a net positive. It's not. I think that we need to allow people to make decisions for themselves. Yeah. And those that are going to make foolish or idiotic decisions are either going to A, learn from that decision and never make it again, or B, continue down that rabbit hole and that path. And I think we need to have a safety net in place for those that do choose to go down those rabbit holes. And I'm not talking specifically about anything. I'm talking generally. But I think we lack having those safety nets, which is why we see bigger societal problems.
So it's the law of unintended consequences, right?
Of course.
Like inevitably,
the unknowns of unknowns.
Anytime you talk about state action, whether it's statutory, regulatory, municipal action, same thing.
Yeah.
Anytime there's government action, there's always a ripple effect. And you think you're solving for problem A, but you're creating problem B, C, and D in solving for problem A.
Yep.
And then you first have to fix problems B, C, and D. You see where I'm going with this?
100%.
Right?
There's always a problem to solve.
Look, I've seen this with clients where like, there's like some regulation that is being like misread or is, shouldn't be applied in a certain way that's like interfering with like unbelievable things and unbelievable outcomes that everyone agrees should happen. And then you got to sit there and like, sort of make the argument, so to speak, and advocate. Right. Yeah. But yes, I mean, there's always the unintended consequences of state action. So you gotta think about that really hard if you're a policymaker.
For sure. Well, I have no clue how long we've been doing this because I forgot to put my little timer up.
I don't
but
know.
Long story short,
an hour and change, an hour and a half.
Regardless, before I ask you the final question.
Okay, final question.
No, before I ask you that final question,
okay.
Is there anything else you want to talk about? Anything you want to ask me? Anything you want to bring up? Anything you want to use this platform say or to vocalize?
So it's funny. This conversation went in a very different direction than I thought it was going to go. I kind of figured we were going to talk about Matt, let's talk about what it's like to be a public affairs advocate, and instead we're going on. But it was good. I had a good time.
I think though we still are doing that.
No, we are, but in a little bit of a different way. No, I mean, there's nothing else that I can think to bring up except that look, I think I said this at the outset, so I'll bring it full circle. I work in state and local government affairs in Florida. I'm very blessed. I mean, I'm blessed on a number of fronts. I have a beautiful family, beautiful wife,
beautiful friends.
Thank you, Maverick. Of course.
Yeah, I don't want you to leave me out of it.
No, of course. No, listen, I'm very fortunate. I get to do something I love. And I interact with policymakers all over Florida on a whole host of different issues, for some wonderful clients. And again, I work with organizations that are working with underprivileged kids, with economic development organizations. I do a lot of work. I don't even know if we talked about this in the environmental silo. Companies that have technologies that are cleaning up water, or managing invasive weeds and allowing more Floridians to enjoy their lakes and their water resources. Green infrastructure clients. Really, I have a wonderful practice, and I've been very blessed. So, and not everyone can say that. Not everyone can be like, yeah, I get up every day and I love what I do, and I'm really fortunate to get to do it. So it's good to be here with you. I appreciate the invitation to appear.
Absolutely.
And it's always good to be on the best of the best.
And I hope that in the near future, as we get to work together again, we get to come back here in maybe a year, maybe longer, maybe less, and talk about some of the things we've been able to accomplish by giving the right people the right access to resources and education and tools to better themselves, to succeed, to make this country stronger. That's one of the main goals of why we do this.
Look, one of my clients is an actual school that's doing an unbelievable work in early childhood ed with forget financial literacy, actual literacy.
Yeah.
Right. And so, that's exactly right. So it's about doing something that is constructive, that is, bringing people together, and that's accomplishing something. So it's incredibly rewarding.
So for the last question.
So what's the last question?
You're going to remember it because I've asked you it on our older episodes.
Okay.
What is one thing you wish you knew when you were in your early 20s?
How did I answer it last time? I don't remember.
I don't remember how you answered it last time. I do remember. You said, I wish I found a friend like Maverick sooner. No.
Did I say that?
No.
I think I do know what I said. And I think this is how I answered it. So I'll answer it this way again. When I was younger in my career, and especially practicing law, you always sort of, the tendency is as a younger professional is as you work for certain people, you think because they're older or more experienced that you kind of have to you have to listen to them because they're your superior in a work environment, but you are sort of programmed in a way to accept. Maybe you're not because you're an entrepreneur, but when I was younger, I worked in very large organizations, and you're almost programmed to accept this person knows what they're doing, this, that, and the other. And that's not true at all. Yeah. And especially now that I'm in my 40s, that's not true at all. It's just not even remotely true. And so I wish when I was younger, I was sort of more, I had more of that sort of self-assurance. Not that I wasn't a confident person, but I just not sort of blindly accepting that, oh yeah, this person, or thinking this person has a big book of business. And so, they must be good at what they do, when in fact, that's also completely untrue.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Completely untrue. And a lot of times that just happens by accident.
Yeah.
Right. And so,
Or I think it happens because of popularity, meaning, oh, that person uses that person. Oh, I want to use that person too.
It can happen for a lot of reasons,
right?
but not necessarily because that person is good at what they do.
100%.
And so like that's something that I wish I had a little bit more awareness of
a lot of the time
when I was in my 20s, because now I definitely do. Now I'm like, I can see through shit immediately.
I think actually a lot of the time, the people that are the best at what they do are not reaping the most fruits of their labor. Meaning, take someone like you, for example. You do very, very well for yourself. If you wanted to, you could bring in more lobbyists underneath you, grow your business to be bigger. For what goal? To make more money. But
Right.
what would you be giving up by doing that? The moral and ethics of what your firm stands on now.
Also, work-life balance.
Work-life balance, right? And so I think
you can't underestimate the value of family. I mean, or overestimate. I mean, like family is everything. You got to have time for that.
100%. And I think the people that I find to come on this podcast to speak as experts, they maybe don't have the biggest name out there. They maybe don't have the biggest company out there, but what they have is the passion for what they do,
Right.
mixed with the knowledge and the ability to continue to learn about what their specialty is. Whereas you have other people that, okay, great, I don't need to learn. I'm already great at what I do. Look at what I've built, right? Like, why am I continuing to learn? It's like, well, you're continuing to learn because you're going to do better. So I actually
Because
think,
you have 2 ears and you're always listening and growing. That's why.
There you go.
See?
2 ears, 1 mouth.
2 ears, 1 mouth.
There you go.
2 ears, 1 mouth. But no, it's true. You're 100% right.
How do people contact you?
So, well, all the information is on
phone. That's what everyone wants.
the bat. That's good. I like
That's
that.
what everyone wants.
I would say go to my website, www.thespritzgroup.com, or since no one uses www anymore, you can just go to thespritzgroup.com. And look, my email is spritz@thespritzgroup.com.
Like an Aperol Spritz.
What's that?
Like an Aperol Spritz.
Like an Aperol Spritz. But no, I would say my website's the easiest way, and my information is all there, and
Matt truly is the best. Like, I know I joke around a lot. You really are great at what you do.
Thank you, Maverick.
I feel lucky and grateful to call you a friend, but also call
Likewise.
you someone that we do business together with. So
Likewise.
I think you're a great person, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for you, and I can't wait to see what you continue to do. I'm excited. We'll do this again too, and you come back on, talk. We'll do it all again.
I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
It's always a pleasure. All right. Thank you so much, Matt. And thank you, everybody. We'll see you later.
Yeah.